What's going on, guys? Welcome to my new series, which is basically a performance overview for how the Xbox One Play Anywhere titles perform on my rig. Now, the first title that I've actually just finished playing is Gears of War 4. And before we go any further, I just want to state that Gears of War 4 is a fantastic, tight little package. And if you're sitting on the fence about picking it up, I highly recommend you go pick it up because it's extremely good. You get a very polished campaign, you get a very, very polished multiplayer experience, and on top of that, you get Horde mode, which is almost a game in of itself. So if you're sitting on the fence, go drop the money and pick this game up. So now that I've actually convinced you to go buy the game, what system should you play it on? Is it worth your time playing on the PC, or should you just stick with the Xbox, which it's natively built for? Now, before I jump into how it performed on my rig, I want to put my rig specifications down in the description, and I'll pop an image up on screen of my rig's specifications as well, just to make it clear and put the performance into perspective. And hopefully you can gauge your system against mine, and it'll give you a rough idea of how it'll perform on your system. Now I'm going to start with the pros, and then I'm going to move into the cons, and come the end of the video I'm actually going to give it a total rating out of 10 as to how I thought it performed on my rig. Before we move any further, I just want to make it abundantly clear that I'm not a PC master race benchmarking expert. So basically the way I've gauged the performance on my PC is pretty much by keeping an eye on the frame rate, tinkering around with all the different graphical settings, and that's basically about it. So with that said and done, let's get into it. Now, obviously being the PC version of Gears of War 4, you would hope that the game would come with all the extra graphical bells and whistles, and I can happily confirm that you have a list of graphical options the size of your leg and your arm combined. It is ridiculous how many graphical options they've pumped into this PC port. And I've got them up on screen here for you now, and hopefully I should be scrolling through them at the moment for you guys to have a look at. And just a little side note, which isn't strictly related to the performance, it's more about the feel of the game and how it's controlling on the PC. And I haven't played the console version of Gears of War, but I have played the original trilogy on Xbox. And I can confirm that the PC port of Gears of War 4, in comparison to the original trilogy on the consoles, is drastically snappier and smoother and feels more fluent. Like, it feels like being on a console and playing Gears of War feeling big, hulky and sluggish to going and playing Halo 5 on the Xbox One. That's the difference there. Like, it's ridiculous how much snappier it feels on a mouse and keyboard. But anyway, let's move on to the actual game performance. So basically after the installation of the game prompted me to do a performance overview of my machine, and it actually ran my machine through a benchmark. And after I completed the benchmark, it gave me a score, and I had the option to use the suggested graphical settings for my machine, which is what I did to begin with. And as you could probably guess, the game suggested I run the game in Ultra, which is what I did. If a game suggests I run it in Ultra, I sure as fuck won't argue with it. And just a little side note, I was also playing in 3440 by 1440p resolution, and that's because I'm actually playing on an ultra-wide monitor. Even with that extra resolution on the sides, it still thought my system was more than capable to run Ultra. So I didn't argue with it, and I jumped straight into the campaign. Now, I was kind of peaking at about 80 to 90 FPS, sometimes around 70 FPS, but after a mission or two and watching the frame rate counter, I was getting some pretty aggressive frame rate dips, and I think at times during the first mission or two, I actually dropped to about 35 to 40 frames per second, which, you know, if you're playing on console or you're used to only performing between maybe 40 to 60, it may not be a big deal for you. But for me personally, I like to consistently maintain a silky smooth 60. So after Gears of War getting my hopes so high that my system was going to be capable of running it on Ultra, I was basically led to the disappointment of having to back out to the menu and drop my system down to high. Now, one very important side note here, which could be another path that you might choose to take rather than dropping down your graphical settings, and that is the Gears of War 4 port for PC supports dynamic resolution, which is a feature that a lot of the Xbox titles actually support on the console. So basically what it means is that if things get too hectic on screen and your frames start to dip, before they have a big drop, the game will actually dial back the resolution to maintain and prioritize frames per second. So if you personally you'd prefer to get those nicer looking visuals on screen and perhaps at times sacrifice some resolution, fantastic. Maybe go that route instead of what I did and dropping down to high. But for me personally, I always choose to prioritize resolution. Now, obviously, as you could imagine, once I'd adjusted my graphical settings to high, I jumped back into the campaign and I tested my new frame rate and the new settings with VSync on and VSync off. With it on, obviously I was capping at 60. With it off, I was actually hovering a little bit higher, around 90 to 100 frames per second, sometimes going over 100. But unfortunately, with VSync on or off, I was still getting those pesky frame rate dips. Now, it didn't seem to make a difference whether VSync was on or off, the dips still were occurring and they were occurring as frequently as whether it was on or off. Obviously, with the settings being low on my PC, the dips weren't going as low as what they were when they're on Ultra. And while that's not ideal, it was still certainly playable. And at the end of the day, I bet you the frame rate's still better on PC than what it is on the console version. Plus, the console version will also be using that dynamic resolution that we talked about, which you would not get control over. So tough titties if you like a resolution and you're restricted to console. Now, I'm probably starting to scare you with all this talk of frame rate dips, but in my opinion, the frequency of these dips is probably acceptable. They were only occurring during the real heat of battle during the campaign. Having said that, there was one other time when the dips were occurring, and that was before and after either loading or saving. So I don't know what's going on there or if that's normal. I personally haven't really noticed it in many other games, but during those times of loading and saving and transitioning areas, usually it was only for maybe 2 to 5 seconds, but the dips would be super aggressive. At times, I believe it actually went down to probably 20 frames per second. But you know, it's not a big deal. It's not like you're really doing anything in these scenes anyway, you're just transitioning areas. Now, on the plus side for frame rate, the multiplayer was actually a rock solid 60 frames per second. I never actually noticed it have any dips at all. I'm not saying it didn't, but I certainly didn't feel it, and I was constantly glancing at the frame rate monitor, and when I was looking, it was 60 frames per second. Unfortunately, last but not least, Horde mode actually performed the worst frame rate wise. Now, I'm going to give Horde mode a little bit of a pass on this, and that's purely due to the amount of enemies Horde mode actually throws at you. And it's pretty much more than what the campaign will throw at you at any given point. They literally bombard you with giant enemies, small enemies, and everything in between. So having said that, I'm giving it a pass, and I will confirm that at no point during the Horde mode did I ever find the frame rate unplayable. And that goes for the multiplayer and the campaign as well. Overall, the frame rate, yes, it gets dips, but it's definitely still 100% playable. Now, I know I've covered and gone into detail about the frame rate, but there's something else going on within the frame rate itself that I think is worth noting here. And while it didn't occur often, it certainly did occur at times, and it did probably become more annoying than the frame rate itself. And I just want to put out there that I did some reading into it and I couldn't find anyone else that had this issue, so maybe it's something 100% unique to me, or maybe I'm just being a whiny little bitch. But from what I read up about it, it's something to do with the frame rate and the rate that the frames are being delivered. So you're probably thinking, well, hey, that just sounds like frames per second. And no, basically what I'm trying to say is that if I'm getting a rock solid 60 frames per second, it's something to do with those 60 frames being delivered unevenly within that second. And basically, it felt like when I was aiming with my reticle on screen, it felt a little bit rough. It's a very strange sensation. I can't describe it. It doesn't feel like poor frame rate. But again, while it was annoying, it wasn't happening too frequently. And I want to stress the fact again that I haven't been able to find anyone else having the same situation, so it could well be unique to either my drivers or my hardware. I don't know. And that kind of wraps up my performance and experience with Gears of War 4. And I know it kind of sounds like I've been negative and harping on about the frame rate, but I think it's important to realize the experience you're going to get with Gears of War 4, and I believe frame rate is a massive part of it. Overall, the performance was pretty good. I didn't have any other issues with the game. I didn't have crashes or freezes, nothing. The game just ran. And it was just a case of occasionally I'd get frame rate dips. So again, I think that's acceptable. Frame rate dips happen in many games. I just wanted to put it out there and let you know that that was actually still happening on the PC side of things, even with beefy hardware. But overall, I don't at all regret playing through the game on my PC, and if given the choice again, I would take the PC again. Because like I said previously, with the keyboard and mouse, Gears of War 4 feels like a completely different experience to the Gears of War franchise on the Xbox. It's so much snappier, it's so much smoother, the controls are just so much more fluent, and I can't stress that enough. So with all being said and done, I'm going to give it 8 out of 10 for performance on my rig. So that wraps it up, guys. I hope you enjoyed, and I apologize if I've accidentally skimmed over anything that you maybe thought was relevant to a PC performance review for a game. If I have, let me know down below, because again, this is my first video, I'm still learning, and when the next Play Anywhere title comes out, I'll try to roll that information into the next video. But that's a wrap, guys, and I just want to leave by saying that if you were sitting on the fence about Gears of War 4, like I said, go pick it up. It's a fantastic experience and it's the start of a new trilogy, and it's a really bright looking future for the Gears of War franchise, and I'm excited to see where it's going. So go pick it up. As always, guys, let me know what you guys think down below in the comments. Have you played on PC? What's your experience been with it? Have you also played on the console version as well? How do they compare with each other? And remember, guys, before you leave, please help me out with a rate, comment, or even a sub. I'd love you to sub, of course. But if I haven't done enough for you to sub in this video, I highly recommend you check out the rest of my channel, because chances are if you're searching for this kind of content on YouTube, you'll probably like what my channel has to offer. So go check it out. My name's Sully, this is One Guy's Opinion, and we're going to talk in the next video.